Dear students, this tutorial video is an introduction into equity analysis. Aim of this introduction is to give you an overview of the most important methods of stock analysis and equity valuation. Moreover, you should be able to identify the most important challenges in stock analysis. The central task of equity valuation is to determine the value of a share. In other words, you can ask yourself, what is a stock of a company worth? For that purpose, there exist two different valuation approaches: absolute and relative valuation. Absolute valuation is based on future performance indicators of a firm, like dividends, profits, free cash flow, etc. While relative valuation derives the equity value from the valuation of comparable companies. In order to apply these valuation methods, a sound knowledge of the company or the industry structure is essential. Some methods require computational expertise as well. In general, a sound knowledge of the valuation method is crucial for a proper application. In company valuation, we distinguish between a valuation based on enterprise value and a valuation based on equity value. The enterprise value consists of the market value common stock plus the market value of preferred equity plus the market value of debt plus the minority interest minus cash and investments. The equity value is then the number of shares times the share price. The difference between enterprise value and equity value is net financial debt. Now let us look at two other indicators that provide some further insights how to value a company. Both indicators are absolute valuation measures. The first is earnings per share, which indicates the profitability of a company. It is calculated by dividing the company's net income with its total number of outstanding shares. The higher the earnings per share of a company, the better is its profitability. A higher profitability implies a higher company value. The second indicator is equity per share. It is defined as the per share value of a company based on its equity. To obtain this number, we simply divide the equity by the number of shares. Some investors use this ratio to determine the equity in a company relative to the market value of the company measured by the stock price. So far, we have seen two examples of absolute valuation measures. However, there are other ratios used by investors. Let us have a look at Puma, a large German sports company. The table provides some key figures of the Puma stock. Next to earnings per share, free cash flow per share and dividend per share are two other frequently used financial ratios that provide insights about the value of a company. We will look at these ratios in detail later in this course. When a company is sold, the seller hands over future profits, dividends, etc. to the buyer of the company. The buyer compensates the seller for this by paying a price. The value of the share is therefore determined by these expected future parameters. Since the future is uncertain and it can be difficult to make appropriate forecasts, we often use historical figures as a basis for future estimates. An important method to determine the equity value of a company is discounting. Discounting means computing the present value of a stream of future cash flows like net income or dividends. For example, the estimated future net income of a company over time is discounted at the required rate of return to obtain the value of equity. Another important issue related to discounting is to specify future profits and dividends of a company. In this context, revenues, operating costs, or investments are an important source of information. Moreover, the general macroeconomic environment of a company is of importance as well. The development of labor costs or shifts in foreign exchange markets might have a significant impact on the company. Furthermore, for a sports company like Puma, a soccer world championship or to sign an iconic personality like Usain Bolt might have a substantial impact on the firm's revenues. How can we now gather all the information required to make meaningful projections about revenues, profits, or costs? One way is to use financial data providers like Bloomberg and Thomson Reuters to retrieve historical data. Very often, company websites and reports provide a vast amount of information that can be useful. For a more detailed view of the company, analyst reports of banks or consulting firms are very helpful. Major absolute valuation methods are discounted cash flow, DCF, methods based on earnings and net income, and methods based on dividends. A second approach to valuation is relative valuation. The idea of this method is to find comparable companies or stocks and to analyze how these firms are valued by the market. For Puma, relevant competitors are among others Nike, Under Armour, or Adidas. How can we now apply the method of relative valuation more concretely? One approach is to use multiples. The most common multiple applied in the valuation of stock is the PE multiple. It is used to compare a company's market value with its earnings. Computationally, the PE multiple is the ratio of share price and earnings per share. Now assume that comparable companies to Puma are valued at 20 times the net income. This implies a PE ratio of 20. Accordingly, we expect that the share price of Puma will trade at 20 times its earnings. One challenge related to this relative valuation approach is to determine what the expected net income of Puma in the future will be. A second question that has to be asked is whether there exist any similar companies that can be used for valuation purposes. So far, we have seen one example of a multiple in form of the PE ratio. A second frequently used multiple is the price-to-book ratio, PB ratio for short, which is defined as the share price divided by the book value of equity per share. Another multiple, often used in equity valuation, is the enterprise value divided by the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, EBITDA. PE and PB ratio are based on the equity approach, while enterprise value to EBITDA is based on the entity approach. After having carefully studied session 1.3, please start with the review questions. This was the last session of lesson 1 on equity. The next study session covered in lesson 2 will be on fixed income.